Well, yes, we continue our coverage of the AGOA summit, which of course concludes today. And while the important issue around the reauthorization of AGOA is high up on the agenda, that's one thing that we cannot ignore, though, is what's playing out in geopolitics and how the USA has been centered all around that. Also looking, for instance, at what's currently happening with Israel as well as the Palestinians in Gaza. And now another issue is around the Lady R. Yes, that issue is back once again. Actually, one of the representatives of Congress in the USA, that is James E. Rich, has now written to the to the Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, questioning the decision by the US administration to continue to have the AGOA Forum taking place here in South Africa, also taking into consideration South Africa's stance when it comes to the so-called non-alignment in the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. But now James Rich has also added another issue, and this is now in relation to the Israel-Palestinian Gaza question. Joining me now in studio is our international news editor, Sophie Mokoena, to speak about the importance of this letter and what it means. Also, Ma'am Sophie, thank you so much for making time for us. Is the question around, sure, Biden says that I want the reauthorization of AGOA, but it's not all left up to him.
It's not all left up to him. This is a legislative process. It has to go to the Congress, the Senate. Only then you can be guaranteed that whatever agreements are reached here will be implemented. Yes, the administration has pointed out, particularly the President Joe Biden, issued a statement on the 1st of November that this is what he wants. We had a video message from Anthony Blinken, who is currently in the Middle East on the Palestinian-Israel question, saying the same thing. But the issue here that we must know as South Africa, as Africa, it is not up to Biden. It is not up to administration. It is the Congress that has to approve, because this is an act. Even when you implement amendments or you introduce amendments, it has to go through the Congress. In the same way in South Africa, when you have an act, it starts with a bill, it goes to Parliament, and then the President will finally sign, and only then it is an act. But that legislative process can be a hindering factor, because you know that the Americans are going to elections next year. And of course, members of Congress are like your MPs. They represent constituencies, and these congressmen and women, they would like to hear from people who will be affected. For example, the agricultural matter. I was in conversation with the Americans. They are saying that there's a strong feeling from those who are involved in the agricultural sector that the laws in South Africa are too rigid. It's not easy to do business, and there are changes that they want South Africa to implement at the bilateral level, and therefore they can use that as a bargaining issue. And also they have to listen to their constituencies, because they are going to elections and they want to be elected. The same way President Ramaphosa, some of the decisions that is taking right now, they have to do with elections. We saw the extension of the social assistance funds to those people who had challenges since COVID-19. There was no way government would have removed that ahead of elections. There are things now with South Africa going to elections, with America going to elections, they will have to take into consideration.
Yeah. What I find interesting now with this letter from James Rich is the Palestinian question that has now also come in, and of course that phone call between the leader of Hamas as well as Dr. Naledi Pandor. She's once explained that call to you as well. But what do you make of this issue now also being put on the agenda?
Clearly, the South African foreign policy will always come under scrutiny, particularly when you have competing interests, because every country has got its own interest. And therefore we know the Americans, in relation to the Russia-Ukraine war, they are with the Ukrainians, and the Foreign Affairs Minister of Ukraine will be in South Africa on Monday meeting Dr. Naledi Pandor. On the other hand, the Middle East question, we know that they support Israel, and therefore South Africa's stance in the Middle East is again a different position to the Americans. Therefore, those issues will be discussed. And now this Congress, the senator, is saying in relation to the foreign policy of the United States of America, South Africa and the US are not on the same page. I spoke to South Africans. They are saying the members of the administration who are here and the technocrats do understand South Africa's position in relation to foreign policies, because this is not something new. These are relations that dates back to exile and of course Mandela and all of that. This is a continuation of the governing party foreign policy. But you will have people who will question that, and therefore the debate, the contestation, it's far from over until it's approved with the legislative process.
I just want to quickly bring in two contrasts here. One is, if you look at the AGOA summit, the AGOA Forum implementation report of 2022, it states the following: international tourism, U.S. national security. When it comes to South Africa, the point is that being made is that with South Africa does not support international acts of terrorism, nor engage in activities that undermine U.S. national security interest. Therefore, South Africa's eligibility is still top-notch, right? And then you contrast that to what James is saying in that letter. Recent actions by South Africa to directly challenge the United States and align our adversaries make the Johannesburg Forum another example of the administration sending mixed messages and engaging in contradictory foreign policy. The inconsistency responses and action of the administration undermines U.S. credibility, making it more challenging for its allies to align with our policies and to deter our adversaries' efforts. What do you make of these contrasts and also the eligibility of South Africa? I wonder if it's ever going to be a question of South Africa gets what has been given to the four other African states that have been now removed from AGOA.
Well, it is a difficult one, but South Africa's foreign policy has never changed since Madiba, Begi, Zuma or Halima. And when this agreement was signed, South Africa had the same position in relation to the Middle East question, in relation to the relationship with Russia. Maybe at that time, because you still had the G8, you'd recall G7 was G8 plus Russia. The relationship were much better with Russia, and now they've gone a different direction. Maybe it's a problem now. And that is why perhaps the senator is thinking of or saying that this must be reviewed. Because when you look at the geopolitics generally, since AGOA was signed, a lot has happened and there are shifts. And therefore, maybe he's arguing in that direction. And then that is why I'm saying now the big question is the Congress. Yeah. What is the Congress going to say? And whether the Biden administration will have numbers to convince congressmen and women to adopt or to agree with the administration. But as I pointed out, it's election year next year, both in South Africa and in the United States of America. And whoever takes a decision will take into consideration the elections, both in South Africa and also in the United States of America. So this is a topic that we are going to engage with. Fortunately, President Biden has pointed out that he wants to speed up this process. We will know on time. And also he will engage with the African counterparts. And Africa also has issues, very serious issues.
Yeah. And some of those issues we will be addressing a bit later on. But let's quickly bring into the conversation SABC News economics editor, Tshepo Mongoai, who's also joining us here in studio. Tshepo, just touching off from the conversation that we just concluded now with Sophie Mokoena, do you think that there's any possibility at all that there could be people who are able to influence the Biden administration on why South Africa should be excluded from AGOA when there is the reauthorization? Or does South Africa still remain very strategic for the U.S. administration?
I think South Africa has a lot to lose in the current discourse. If you take a step back, when the current framework was agreed, South Africa was subjected to a clause called outer review. under AGOA, putting South Africa under very strict monitoring in terms of its compliance with the demands that the Americans made at the time. They raised a number of questions and concerns. One was the issue of the agricultural sector. Particularly, they were very specific about accessing the South African market in terms of the chicken product. As there was a lot of pushback from the South African side, and they actually ensured that there's constant monitoring of South Africa. The other issue was the issue of trademark protection of American trademark. The American companies are losing billions because they are accusing South Africa of not being able to enforce the issue of trademark in South Africa. So from there on itself, you could see that there are a number of gaps that South Africa has not been doing well. You can, of course, separate South Africa from the rest of other countries who are beneficiaries because South Africa has got a bigger market. South Africa can actually take advantage and participate fully in AGOA. Other countries, as much as they want to, they are still struggling. The issue of infrastructure. South Africa has got a better infrastructure. You put aside the issue of the politics aside, there are serious concerns that they are raising about South Africa, and they want to access the South African market. It's not just the way they are approaching South Africa. It's not just going to be, it has to be reciprocal in terms of how they approach it. They are making very firm demands that South Africa must open up. We tend to protect our industries for the right reasons. We say we want jobs, but they've also made it clear that you can't have your cake and eat it. There has to be a change in approach. So you are going to see some very firm and strong words coming from both the Senate and the American government as well, raising their concerns. And I think there are issues that are holding the discussions because they cannot go past those particular issues, some of them that we've already highlighted. And obviously, there has to be a give and take in this discussion.
There has to be a give and take. Tshepo Mongoai there, SABC News economics editor. We're going to go to a quick ad break. When we come back, we're in conversation with Judge Judd Deverment, who is a senior director for African Affairs as part of the U.S. National Security Council. So some of the issues that we actually touched on here are some of the issues that we will be addressing with him.